By the time I got to varsity in high school, I was way down the depth chart, and my senior year was fourth string out of four. I went to the football building the day before classes started my freshman year, and it was about mid-afternoon, and I was going to go up to Coach Tereshinski's office, and when I got in the elevator, I saw someone's hand extend out to open it because they saw I was outside and the doors were about to close, and it ended up being Coach Tereshinsky
Oh, wow.
himself in the elevator. So I had kind of, like a 30-second blurb about myself prepared, just to
In the
say that I wanted
elevator.
to try out. Yes, well,
That's
except for when I get in the elevator, Coach T just looks at me and says, "Are you the guy that was going to try out?" And so I just said yes. Clearly, he had me confused with somebody else he'd spoken with, probably on the phone before. And so
oh,
then at
great.
that point, he says, "All right, well, the meeting's getting ready to start." So I had just happened to go there 5 minutes before the meeting where they're discussing tryouts with everybody. And the coach never asked me any questions, not what my name was, what position I was playing, nothing, and just led me straight into the meeting. They basically just said, the team's full. We don't have any more room. Um, and so that was really just kind of it. And then after that, I was on the way back to the locker room because every time you get cut you have to clear out all your stuff, and I saw there was like a comment sheet that a coach had left, and it was pretty brutally honest on there. I mean, they had said that I was too small, too slow, average strength, and then it ended by saying that like they appreciated my effort and desire, but that I should give it up. But
Mm,
I had to be willing to work incredibly hard while staying patient, knowing that success was not right around the corner for years. So
mhm.
from the day that I walked into Coach Tereshinsky's office until I finally got to play was 1,543 days.
What's up, everyone? Welcome to episode 9 of Take the Next Step. I am your host, Ryan Sterling. I can't believe I'm on episode 9 already. I'm having a blast hosting this show. And I have to say, I'm really flattered with all of the feedback that I received from listeners. I have to say, I attribute it all to my amazing and inspiring guests who have been so gracious to share their time and story with you. And today's episode will not disappoint. Today I have Candler Cook. He is the author of the book From Underdog to Bulldog, My Journey as a College Football Walk-On. Candler is a former University of Georgia football player. And for those who don't know anything about college football, University of Georgia is the top of the top. They are consistently ranked in the top 5. And having a spot on the University of Georgia football team is not an easy task. And I have to say, when I first saw this book, I thought I knew who Candler was. I was pretty sure he was a guy who was a high school football star, and maybe he wasn't a top recruit, but he was clearly good enough and had the reputation to attract attention from Division I coaches. And after taking into this book and then speaking with Candler, I could not have been more wrong. Candler did play high school football, but he was largely a bench warmer. He was fourth string. He recorded 1 tackle in high school. And when he went to college, he was 6'1" and 145 pounds. Hardly the look of a Division I top tier football player. But a chance encounter with a coach led to a tryout. He's cut multiple times, but nonetheless decided to persevere and continue to focus on his goal. And I'm not going to ruin anything for you, but he does ultimately make the team. That said, listen to the story because it's truly unbelievable the process he had to go through, both in terms of his focus, his discipline, but also the physical transformation that he went through from going from 6'1", 145 pounds to 275 pounds of muscle. Candler is a super inspiring guy. I took away so much from this interview, and I really look forward to sharing his story with you today. All right, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chandler Cook. I hope you enjoy. When I picked up this book and I saw a picture of you on the cover and you look like a football player, you look like a Georgia football player, that's who I thought you were. And then I started to read the book. And I have to say, I have never heard a story like yours of somebody, and I'm going to have you tell the story, but of somebody who, where you were in high school as a high school athlete, bridging the gap from a high school athlete to being a walk-on on one of the top football teams in the country. I mean, it is a story, again, like I've never heard. So we know you right now. You're on the cover of the book. You're an SEC football player. You are a walk-on, but you're solidly on the team. We know that's who you are. You're a former SEC University of Georgia football player. But let's take it back. Let's take it back all the way to when you were 10 years old and you first fell in love with the game of football.
Sure. Yeah, so when I was young, I always looked up to my parents, and both of them went to University of Georgia, and my dad was just a huge football fan. I mean, every year he'd go to probably 3 or 4 games, including some of them that were out of town that were not home games. And really around, I'd say when I was probably 7 or so, he started bringing me pretty regularly. So I would go to the majority of games that he would go to as well, and I was just blown away by the experience of it. Being in the stadium, it's so loud. You see how much it means to so many people. There are at least as many people outside the stadium just watching it in the town of Athens as there are inside the stadium. Yeah. So it means so much to so many people, and it was just such an exciting sport. Football is it's such an American sport by nature. I mean, there's, very few other countries that play it, and people care about it so much. Even though baseball is known for being America's pastime, I really don't know any baseball fans that will cheer or boo with every single ball or strike like people cheer for every single play of a football game, like it's life or death. So I really just kind of caught on to that level of enthusiasm to where football especially Georgia football, just meant the world to me. And when I wasn't at the games on Saturdays, I was always watching lots of college football. So the older I got, the more I just thought about it and said, why can't I go out there and do that? Why?
So were you playing football? Were you playing youth football at the time?
Yes, I started playing youth football when I was 10.
Okay.
And thankfully, I was on the Bulldogs that year because they were named after college teams. I don't know what I would have done if I had been picked on Georgia Tech's team. But
and how were you as a 10-year-old football player?
Not that great, really. They let everybody start on at least one side of the ball, so they put me on offensive line, which at that age, it's not really based on size. It's just that the kids that can't run fast or catch well play O-line. So that's
were you a big kid at that point?
No, I was small. I was I think a little less than 100 pounds when I was 10 years old and started playing football.
Okay. And then then you continue playing football, middle school, and then you played in high school, and it was just more the love of the game.
Yes. Yeah. The last time in my entire career that I ever started in a game was in 7th grade.
Okay.
So from then on, I was really, a backup. And by the time I got to varsity in high school, I was way down the depth chart. And my senior year was 4th string out of 4.
So the last time you started a football game was in the 7th grade. When was it? At what point did you say, I want to be the gladiator in the arena. I want to be not a college football player. I want to be a University of Georgia football player. At what point did that come into your mind as a serious goal?
Probably the first time that I was in that stadium. Now the steps that I had to take to get to that place became, they became more difficult the more I learned about it and the older I got. But I always, as long as I can remember, wanted to make that happen. And, then once I started getting closer to that age, like once I was in high school, I was looking further into some of the, physical things that people have to do to play at that level, and saw that there was just, this massive gap between where I was and where I needed to be to have, any kind of prayer of making that happen.
Yeah. So talk about high school for a second. So you mentioned that the last time you started was 7th grade, but I mean, did you play in high school? Were you a contributor on the team?
Yeah, I mean, whenever we were up by 30 points or more, I would play in a game in high school.
Okay. So you weren't a starter.
Correct. Yeah, not even close.
So what were your stats, for example, senior year? What position did you play?
Linebacker.
Linebacker. How many tackles did you have?
0. I had 1 tackle in high school, and it was my sophomore year.
Okay. So 1 tackle in high school, 0 your senior year. You have this, again, to go back, you have this goal at the age of 7, you go to your first football game, which a lot of kids go to their first football game and say, I want to be in that arena, right? I mean, I was the same way. But I mean, at what point in time, I mean, in high school, were you telling people I want to play at Georgia, and were people like, you're out of, how did you continue to have this goal when it was, I mean, it must have been pretty clear that this was a lofty goal and a goal that was probably not going to happen. Or maybe you didn't. I'm sure I'm putting words in your mouth, but like maybe you didn't think it wasn't going to happen. Because from I just look at that and like, again, I had an awareness at a young age. Okay, like I'm 5'10", I'm 150 pounds. Like I'm not going to play. I'm slow. I'm not going to play football or basketball. But for you, like, did that ever enter your mind?
Well, I mean, I will say I didn't talk about it at all. I didn't mention it to any of my friends or family. It was just a goal that I had. And yeah, I mean, I knew the odds would be really stacked against me, but there was also so much more that I needed to learn at that point. Because when I was in high school, I had no idea what the walk-on process was like. Because there are 2 kinds of walk-ons. One's a preferred or invited walk-on. That's where someone's recruited, but they just don't have enough room for scholarships, and so they'll promise them a spot on the team. And then the other kind are guys that just show up at a tryout and make it. So I didn't even know if there were tryouts or what that would look like. So there's still so much more to learn, but I knew the odds were really stacked against me.
So you graduate high school, you're going to Georgia, and so did you go to Georgia with the intention of I want to play football, or did you go to Georgia saying I want to go to Georgia because I'm from Georgia, my parents went there, it's the connectivity to the school, and if I play football, then great?
It was really the second one. I mean, I was very dedicated to still trying to make this goal happen, but I really wanted to go to Georgia just as a school. It was the only place I applied to. Both my parents went there. 2 of my 3 sisters ended up going there, so we're just kind of a UGA family.
Okay. So you get to campus, and how do you find out about tryouts? And what's your size at this point?
Sure. So I was really about 6'1" or 6'2". I grew another 1.5 inches afterwards when I was in college, and then 145. So really slim.
That's not a football player.
No, it's not. I mean, even as a kicker, they'd be pretty worried if you got hit on a kickoff, you could get hurt at that size.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking if I'm hearing 6'1", 145, and someone's going out for Division I SEC football school, I'm thinking they're probably a wide receiver with really good hands that probably runs a 4.3 40.
Yeah.
What was your 40? What was your 40 time?
It was awful. It was 5'6", and so in high school I was the weakest player on the whole team and the 3rd slowest. So yeah, basically when I got there, the way that I found out about the tryout was actually pure luck. I was at an informal rush event for a fraternity. This was in July, so a month before I started classes as a freshman. And when I was there, one of the guys was the guy that I had played against in high school, and he was a kicker for a really good team. And he just mentioned that he was going to be trying out, and he mentioned the name of the coach, which was a coach that I had met back when I was 10. My dad had like an employee appreciation day for Georgia Power, where they brought a handful of employees and their kids or significant others to a UGA practice. So I remember meeting Coach Tereshensky, who was in charge of the walk-on process. And so now that I knew he was in charge, I knew that I just needed to set a time to go to his office and try to convince him to let me try out.
So did you actually set a formal time, or you just show up at the office cold?
No, I just showed up. I didn't know what the procedure was like for it, but I figured if you call to set up a time, they may ask a lot of questions about your experience and stuff, and I wanted to, um, almost just catch them spur of the moment, talk with them, and just hope for the best.
Wow. So that was very intentional. You wanted to have this prize element because you didn't want to be told no over the phone.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And yeah, something like that. I figured if I tell them over the phone, it may be like a secretary who jots down a couple notes, or maybe it's a post-it note that goes in the trash or something. And I just in person, I figured was the best way to have that conversation.
As an 18-year-old, how did you have that awareness?
It was really just decision making on my end, just trying to think. It was already a slim chance, but what would at least give me the best chance for that to happen? And thankfully, it ended up playing out really well. I went to the football building the day before classes started my freshman year, and it was about mid afternoon, and I was going to go up to Coach Tereshinski's office. And when I got in the elevator, I saw someone's hand extend out to open it because they saw I was outside and the doors were about to close. And it ended up being Coach Tereshinsky
Oh, wow.
himself in the elevator. So I had kind of, like a 30-second blurb about myself prepared, just to
In the
say that I wanted
elevator.
to try out. Yes, well,
That's,
except for when I get in the elevator, Coach T just looks at me and says, "Are you the guy that was going to try out?" And so I just said yes. Clearly, he had me confused with somebody else he'd spoken with, probably on the phone before.
oh,
Um,
okay.
and so
That's
then
right.
at that point, he says, "All right, well, the meeting's getting ready to start." So I had just happened to go there 5 minutes before the meeting where they're discussing tryouts with everybody. And the coach never asked me any questions, not what my name was, what position I was playing, nothing, and just led me straight into the meeting.
So, okay, that's really interesting. So, but it sounds like when he said, "Are you here for the meeting?" You just said yes blindly. You didn't
I mean,
ask
I
a
was
clarifying
I was
question.
there for the meeting, but yes, at that point, I was not going to, launch into some blurb about myself when it seems like he's just going to walk me right into the meeting right now.
I mean, it's really interesting. You had some innate sales instincts from a really young age. Like, were your parents in sales?
No, they were not. But it's funny you mentioned that. I don't think I would have thought about that at the time. But now that I've been in business, we're part of what I do now, and some other roles have been sales related. I guess that's a good point. Like once you have the sale, there's no reason to keep, just like talking through it, or trying to talk up the product or anything like that. Like once you have the sale, you just have it.
You just stopped 100%, right? But you also, though, you had the awareness of, again, another sales practice of just showing up someplace as opposed to going through the proper channels and just probably being told no. You just, again, I'm just fascinated that you had these innate instincts of what to do versus not to do at a young age. So I feel like most 18-year-olds, number one, they probably would have called to set an appointment. And number two, if they didn't do that and they were in the elevator and they saw the coach, they would probably spew their entire life story at the coach and probably screw it up. So the fact that you just innately knew, number one, I'm just going to show up at his office because I have a better chance of just slipping by, which ended up happening. And then number two, the fact that you were asked a question, you said yes, kind of naively, but there must have been some strategy there too of just say yes and follow this guy.
Yeah, there definitely was. At that point, I felt like, especially given the fact that I did not have good qualifications, less is more in terms of what I was going to
Right.
say. It
100%.
can be a little different in sales if like your product is clearly better than the customer's product. But if there's not really much of a fleshed out product that you're selling, you kind of just less is more. And if they're ready to roll with it, then you just go with it and show them what you have.
100%. And I didn't mean this to be necessarily a sales conversation, but I think we're going in an interesting direction here because I firmly think that sales is something that we need to teach people at a younger age because it's such an important
Hmm.
skill. I actually think it's something that should be
Sure.
taught in college because I mean, in the, whatever you're doing, the ability to sell and have those sales instincts or sales training, regardless of what you're doing, is super important. Whether
Right.
it's closing a deal, which in the role that you're currently doing, or if it's trying to become a walk-on as a 6'1", 145-pound, 5'6", 40 freshman. I mean, it's the same principles. It's the same the same approach. So okay, so going back to the story though. So now you walk into this room. You're 5 minutes before the meeting. So it's not just you. It's a whole group of people in this.
Right, there were probably 15 to 20 guys there, all of which were in significantly better physical condition than I was. There
Were these some of the preferred walk-ons as well as the people who were just showing up, or was it just the people who were showing up who were not the preferred walk-ons?
Good question. These were just guys that were showing up that were not preferred. So
Okay.
the preferred guys, they just get kind of whisked right into the locker room. They're ready to practice. This was a group of guys that wanted to try out. Most of these guys were still kind of like you mentioned, some of the kids you went to high school with. A lot of these guys were all city or all state. Maybe they were a little undersized to get a scholarship to a major D1 program. And some of them were specialists, like the guy that I knew who was trying out to be a kicker, and he was a great one in high school.
So what did you feel at that time being in the room?
I was nervous. I felt maybe a little bit self-conscious because I was probably the only one that didn't physically look like I should be in that room. But also very excited. The coach was walking us through the process where we had to fill out a lot of paperwork, and then we had to get a physical, and then that the tryout was going to last really all spring and into the summer, which I assumed tryouts would be a day or a week, and I have heard now that when Kirby Smart took over from Mark Richt, that tryouts are now one day. So they make very, very quick judgments. I think in less than an hour, which is it's kind of hard to evaluate. But then the way that it was when I was trying out was they get to evaluate like every single aspect of you possible during this period because they're seeing you in the weight room, in conditioning drills, in football practice, in the spring game, and then in the weight room again, and then finally they make a decision.
So you're not playing your freshman year. Like this is not to be on the fall team.
Well, right. So basically, that's right. So for that meeting, what they said was that they would basically let us try out that next spring, but that they were going to keep an eye on this group because if anyone, got hurt, got kicked off the team, or if a preferred walk-on decided they didn't want to play, then they would pull someone from that group, which they later did end up pulling 3 guys, and they got to play that very first fall. But for everyone else, this was to play, a whole year after then.
So so the tryouts were effectively, again, kind of a year long. And were you with the team during this time?
So fall of my freshman year, I was working out in the team weight room with the team, but I was not practicing. So they can only have 125 guys total at practice. And so we did have some guys fall off during workouts. There were a couple guys that just decided it wasn't for them, but it ended up being really about like 10 of us that were in this group that just worked out all fall, but that we knew they wouldn't have a place for us to practice until the next spring.
So, okay. And you weren't suiting up for games or going in the locker room during game time. Okay. So it was just mainly working out with the team. But with this open tryout, then were you on a regimented schedule, or I guess how were they evaluating you along the way?
Sure. So they had a graduate assistant in charge of our workouts, where he would specifically look at just our group. And I'm sure he was reporting back to the guy who was in charge of the walk-on program. And he would let him know, who some of the guys didn't even really know all of the major lifts, which I had at least been taught good technique in the weight room in high school. But some of the guys went in there and you could just tell, I mean, maybe they'd spent some time in a weight room, but just never really learned proper form or anything. But some of them looked like they were going to like hurt their back on some of the stuff we were doing. And so The coaches could kind of weed through that. And then they started to look through, within like a month or two, they were seeing who was actually progressing, which thankfully I was making some very quick progress. Like in the first month of these workouts, I gained like 10 pounds. And then the second month, I think another 8 pounds. So they could at least see a difference, even if I started way behind. And a lot of the other guys, you could see that they were, it was making a difference for them too, because it was the first time being in like a college strength and conditioning program.
So how many days a week were you doing this?
It started off with 3 days a week, and then it became 4 later that fall, just kind of ramping up to get us ready for the spring tryout.
Okay, and it was mainly strength and conditioning. Were there other drills you guys were working on?
No, correct. It was just strength and conditioning, no drills. So any kind of individual position work that you needed to do, that was on your own.
Okay. Now, was anybody at this point in time? So now you're trying out for the team. Was anyone like, hey man, you got a pretty big gap to fill here?
No, not really. I knew that was the case.
Okay.
But nobody said that, just because, the one graduate assistant strength coach that was working with us was just, he was just doing his job coaching everybody. And I knew that was the case, but I think everyone else was just focused on, themselves and improving so much each week that nobody really said anything like that to me.
So could anyone have gone through this program?
It's not supposed to be that way. I found out later that almost everyone had spoken with coach like at least a month or two beforehand. And he had, I think, like either placed a call to their high school coach or Googled them or something to see, how they had done. But all of these guys had started at least a couple years in high school. And most of them were, all city or all state. So I think it was just completely by accident that I caught him at the elevator that day.
So it was open tryouts, but it wasn't really open in the sense that it was more or less invite only.
Well, it was open in the sense that anyone was open to initiate a conversation with him, but they tried to weed a lot of guys out before they even got to it. So kind of yes and no, was sort of open, but for everyone else, they had to kind of go through a process to even get to the tryout part.
Yeah. Okay, got it. Okay, so you're making really amazing progress here. So you're putting on a lot of weight, and this is good weight. This is muscle weight.
Mm-hmm.
What do you attribute that to besides just the lifting?
I think it was eating probably even more than the lifting, because I knew I needed to gain a lot of good weight in a hurry. So I started eating 6 regular size meals a day, healthy food. I never touched a dessert the whole time I was in college.
Were you given eating plan, or is this on your own?
No, I made it up. So UGA's dining halls are really some of the best in the country. It's almost like a full service high end buffet, except they have 4 of them, and one was open 24 hours, and you can eat unlimited times a day.
Oh wow.
So yeah, it was good stuff. They would have steaks, or you could get stir fry, like all kinds of stuff. So I would go there, and I really just started reading up on some NFL players and bodybuilders, what they do to put on a lot of muscle mass, and just devised a meal plan from there, where I was eating just a ton of complex carbs and protein, some vegetables, and then really that's it. I stayed away from sugars, desserts, things like that. And so I think that really helped me gain a lot of weight. And then by the end of that semester, I was up to 185. So I'd put on 40 pounds in like 4 months, and was all good weight. I was a decent bit faster than I was when I started it. And so it felt like between the strength plan and then eating, that had really made a difference, where I at least started to close the gap.
Okay. So it's interesting going through your book. It somewhat reminds me, it's a different story and a different tone, but it kind of reminds me of the David Goggins book, Can't Hurt Me, in the sense that, I don't know if you're familiar with that book, but the sense that, someone who accomplished something against all odds. But I like the fact that at the end of each chapter, you also included a teaching point, which I thought was really helpful. And one thing I want to talk about here is that you had a goal to make the team, but that wasn't enough. Can you talk about kind of what your goal, again, your big goal was to make the team,
but it seemed like you had the foresight to say, okay, that's my big goal, but in order to reach that goal, I need to have a bunch of smaller goals. Can you talk about that?
Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah. So it was always very important to me to break it down into smaller goals, because just saying that that I wanted to play in a game and before then wanted to make the team, it's too big. It's too much. Like if you just say that you want to climb Mount Everest and you don't really have any milestones along the way, you're not going to make it. And so I knew just right from the start that I had to break it down into really like manageable short-term goals.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would really, basically try to see, can I gain 1 to 2 pounds this week? Can I add maybe 5 pounds to my major lifts like every couple of weeks or so, and just see, can I be better than I was last week?
Mm-hmm.
And try to make sure that I'm hitting these checkpoints along the way, because that breaks it down into more manageable pieces where you're not feeling overwhelmed. Because if I had gone into it, even knowing what I would have to do to make the team, it could have been really discouraging to just only think about the big picture without breaking it down into like bite-sized pieces.
100% agree. That really landed with me from your book. And I think something that, for someone listening out there, it's great to have big goals, but if you have big goals without the short-term benchmarks and thresholds, it's going to be impossible to get there. And I know, I can tell you for me with things that I wanted to accomplish, again, anytime I made something too big, it never got done. But when I shortened the distance and I almost took my mind off the destination and just focused on these short-term thresholds, things completely changed after that. And so going back, putting yourself there, so you had this goal that was always in the back of your mind. But when you first started out, did you ignore the destination for the time being? And were you just in I need just to get to the next benchmark? Like, what was your mindset at that point?
Well, the end destination was always in the back of my mind. That was what had me super excited to get up each day. But that one day, I would really just try to focus on comparing myself to myself from last week instead of comparing myself to the guys working out with me. They were obviously significantly stronger than I was.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So what was your very first threshold benchmark that you wanted to hit?
Really, I wanted to try to get my weight as high as possible. I wanted it to be at least 180 by the end of the semester, because that is still extremely small for college football, but it's at least getting closer.
Mm-hmm.
And I decided I was going to try out as a linebacker, since that's what I had played in high school. So I at least knew the technique of the position, even if I didn't have a lot of experience. But in order to play that in college, you really, even as a walk-on, probably need to be 215 or so, or 220. So I was trying to, just get as far as I could towards closing that gap, make sure that I was getting my 40 time down, and really just doing anything else that the coaches said to try to make sure I was ready for that first tryout.
So did you hit 180 by the end of this first semester?
So I got to 185 at the end of it, and was able to maintain that even even over like Christmas break and everything. So I came back to school like right at 185, ready for the tryout spring of my freshman year.
40 pounds of muscle that you put on in a couple of months. It's pretty remarkable. What were the coaches saying at this point?
Well, really, I was still mostly interacting with just the graduate assistant in the who was doing the walk-on strength and conditioning program, and then Coach Tereshinsky, who was in charge of the walk-on program. Well, then everything kind of pivots in January. They threw us into full team workouts. We're working out with the head strength coach, the entire team. And
did you have to pass a certain test to get there, or were you going to get there regardless of what your weight was?
It was really kind of an eyeball test. You did, like at the end of the semester, Coach Tereshinsky pulled aside myself and a couple other guys and said that he could tell we'd all progressed a lot and that he was going to let us try out that spring. So it was really just his opinion, which was feedback from the coach who was running our workouts.
Okay, so you were being noticed for your progress.
Yeah.
And your hard work. Okay, that's great. Okay, so then you get an invite to work out with the entire team starting in January?
Yes. And so we had a month of just strength and conditioning with the team, which was great to be a part of that. And then in February, we had mat drills, and those are known for being just, grueling training. There were a couple guys I know that were actually veterans that went through that training that, went to college later that weren't even able to finish that. So that gives you an idea of just the physicality of it. It was a lot of, I guess, like sprinting, speed work, but also doing that while you're in a football stance, chopping your feet, and there's a chute over your head. So if you start to rise up at all, you'll hit your head on a metal pole, which is very fun. But yeah, I'd heard about those drills and just the intensity of them, and sadly, a handful of guys had passed away from those
Oh, wow.
drills.
At Georgia?
No, not at Georgia, but at Florida State, which is where Mark Richt had come from. So they were known for just pushing everyone to the limit. So before those drills, I actually, in the weeks leading up to it, deliberately lost 5 pounds just so I'd be carrying around a little less weight and be in better shape. And at this point, they had added to our group significantly. So there were really about probably 40 guys trying out instead of 15 to 20. There were a lot of guys that transferred into Georgia in January.
Oh, okay.
So if you're not a student, they couldn't have been working out the last fall, but they were now with us. And so
were those like junior college guys?
Yeah, some of them were junior college. Some were from other big schools. Like one guy started for Georgia Southern and decided he wanted to try his hand at UGA, and he ended up making the team.
Okay.
One guy played for West Georgia and was a graduate transfer, so he had 1 year left, and he made the team as well.
So these new guys are a real deal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
So it starts out with 40 guys, and I mean, on the very first day, they just started dropping like flies. Like a lot of guys did. So even some of the starters or all SEC or all American guys, like a lot of them would fall out. They just wouldn't be able to finish it, or they'd start throwing up, and the trainers would pull them out of the drill for the day. But if anyone from the walk-on tryout group either got sick or was pulled out or couldn't complete a drill, they just wrote down your name and said, "All right, you're done. Just never come back."
Wow. Did you know that going into it?
I kind of assumed it was that way. Like I knew that at the end of the day, the walk-ons aren't going to be the guys that are starting for you, except for a few rare exceptions. And so in general, if you're slowing the team down in any way, there's just no room for you.
Matt Stafford has a little bit of slack, but Handler Cook does it.
Yeah, he did really well, but there were a lot of starters that they couldn't complete the first couple of days of drills. But when they get pulled out, they got to sit down and get some water. But if you were in the walk-on group and you did that, you were just kicked off the team immediately, like no questions asked.
So were you actually watching people go through these drills and bow out before you had to go up and do it?
Well, yeah, kind of at the same time that I was, but sometimes, so basically at the end of each mat drill, you either get a thumbs up or a thumbs down. And if you get a thumbs down, sometimes the coaches give everyone a thumbs down just to see how they'll respond mentally. So if you get a thumbs down, you have to sprint back and immediately go again. So you don't even get to rest for the other like 5 groups to go through like you usually do. So sometimes just to kind of like mess with a group, the coaches might give them 4 thumbs down in a row, and you could just see like that thin line of they're trying not to break mentally, but they're about to. And then some of the guys would just give up and just like walk off to the side or just like leave the room because they couldn't do it anymore.
Did you know before going back that January that did you know anything about the mat drills in the process?
They didn't tell us what they were, but they, specifically, I just knew they were conditioning, and I Googled them and read how players like David Pollock, who was a 3-time All-American for Georgia, he mentioned it was the toughest thing he'd ever done by far. So I knew to just, basically just focus on conditioning. Like even though we were going through workouts in January, it was really more improving my endurance and speed was important, because different times of the off season, especially during the walk-on process, you really need to be ready for different things. So like going into January, it was good to be at your strongest, but really by the end of that month, you needed to probably lose a little weight and get in better shape. Just to be able to cope with mat drills.
So you knew this was coming. Now, so when you hear about something like, okay, David Pollock said it was the hardest thing he had ever done, how are you taking that? Are you seeing that as an advantage, a disadvantage? Is that making you excited for it, scared for it? Strategically, how did you see this?
I saw it as an advantage because mat drills takes strength and football ability completely off the table, which were two of my weaknesses at this point. And it's really just about conditioning and mental toughness. And so, I had been through a lot of tough training for football before and been through grueling practices for wrestling in high school and, really all the way back to when I was a kid. So I was used to that. So I saw it as an advantage. It was really the first and for a while the only way that or really the only like drills where I could actually beat some of the starters, just because some of those guys would get to a certain point and just think like it's not worth it anymore. Like at a certain point your body just starts to kind of just hurts a lot. Your mind is going numb. It feels like you've been in there for 3 hours. And I should mention also, we started these at 4:30 in the morning. So your body's, I mean, even if you wake up at 3 and you really allow a lot of time before you get there, your body's not going to be at its best performance at 4:30 in the morning.
Yeah, no question. So and then you're seeing other people go through this. You're seeing starters bow out. You're seeing people mentally break. What's going through your head at that point?
Just keep going. Just the fact that I guess with each guy that falls out, the guys that are still left look a little bit better. And so just thinking through how I needed to keep pushing, make sure that I didn't stop, and make sure that there are a lot of guys that complete mat drills, but they don't really actually do well. Like at the end, they're running at such a slow pace that like somebody's grandma probably could have passed them. And so I wanted to make sure that I was like sprinting through the finish line on each and every drill.
You put in your book that this drill also had a way of humanizing some of these guys who were just these monster athletes. So it almost seemed like it gave you confidence to say you're seeing people that, again, at first glance look like these machines, and you're seeing the human side of them. You're seeing them break down. And it's interesting because I could see that going one of two ways, but you took that as okay, like we're on the same level now.
Yeah, it was amazing because I didn't see myself as on the same level because I wasn't. These guys were so much better than me in so many different physical ways, like speed, strength, and then football skills, which are completely different from those first two. So it was interesting to see that there were some areas that I could compete and even beat some of these guys. That was kind of encouraging to see that.
So you got through mat drill. You were successful in doing so. Correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
And were the coaches like, hey, good job, man?
No. You were just ready to be thrown into the next fire. So at the end of mat drills.
But how did you feel when you got through mat drills?
Oh, I felt good. I felt like I had done what I was there to do, and that I was, ready for the next step. But the next part was going to be a little scary. I was going to be, putting on pads for the first time. And it's just you never really can tell for yourself how great these guys are at football until you're actually playing football against them.
Yeah.
So part of me was a tiny bit worried about that next step that was in front of us in March.
At this point, does the head coach, Mark Richt, does he know who your name is?
Well, I would say probably not. He may have known it by like March or April of that year, but it could have been later. I didn't really get any one-on-one time with him until I had made the team. So, I mean, I knew obviously by then he did, but he may have learned it just in practice. But I mean, very quickly, like on the first day, each position coach knew the names of everyone that was trying out for his group.
So you get through, you're putting on pads for the first time. So are you now practicing with the team?
Yes. So starting in March, we're putting on pads, we're practicing, we're all one group. So you're going through drills, and if you're a walk-on, so I was a linebacker, and so they need to practice tackling. So a lot of time they'd give me and the other guys a ball, and you just run and just get blasted by these guys, and they'll just like knock you clean off your feet. So yeah, that was a lot of what practice was.
Okay. So you're kind of like a tackling dummy in a way, but you're doing whatever you were told to do. You're just doing your job every single day in practice. And then at this point, did you know you were going to be a part of the spring game?
Yes. So I mean, at that point, as long as somebody doesn't voluntarily quit, if you're there during practice, there's 4 weeks of practice, so you're going to be there for the spring game.
And did you play in the spring game?
Yes. So they actually tried to do a good job of playing everyone in the spring game, which I thought was nice. Kind of as a reward for getting through where they were, and then also just to see how guys respond in a game-like situation. Even though there was a sparse crowd, that'll probably resemble what the crowds are going to look like in 2020. That's about like most spring games.
Yeah.
It's still a game situation. Their referees were keeping score, so it was a little different. So I got in for 4 plays. Didn't register any tackles or anything, but definitely lined up right and did what I was supposed to do.
Talk about that experience. How was that participating in the spring game?
That was amazing. I was so excited because I didn't know if I was going to get to. And then actually, Brian Pilon, who was one of my good friends during the walk-on process, and later sophomore year was my roommate. He actually kind of leaned across the locker room and gave me a thumbs up because he was going in at the same time that I was, which was right at the beginning of the third quarter. So I was really excited about that.
Wow, that's awesome. Just walking, was that the first time you walked through the tunnel?
Yeah, I mean, I loved walking onto that field. It was amazing, just how loud everything felt, how exciting it was to be out there. But at the same time, you really have to focus because they're only going to give you a couple plays. Like I knew they weren't going to play anyone from that tryout group extensively, and if you messed up badly one time, like believe me, they will find out, and it will not be good for you.
But it must have been an amazing feeling. I mean, you're not necessarily at your goal yet, but you're making incredible progress. I mean, this must have been a dream come true.
Yeah, it really was exciting. I mean, part of me was super glad that I'd made it to that point because the odds were against me to probably even start the tryout, and then let alone make it through the whole thing. At this point, of the 40 guys, there are probably 22 or something left. But we also knew that just because of the numbers with how many guys were trying out, and how many guys were already on the team, they were probably taking 5 guys out of this group. So it's not a lot. There was so much demand for guys that wanted to walk on or play at Georgia because they had just finished the previous season ranked number 2 in the country, and they were preseason number 1 the next year. So anybody who you kind of like the one guy who went to Georgia Southern, there were a lot of guys that were great football players in their own right that decided to transfer in, that were they were truly already playing at a college level and kind of used to it at that point.
So this is like Matt Safford, Noshawn Moreno, AJ Green.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this is a really good team. And these are all NFL players. Okay, so they're going to take. So there are 40 guys. It's down to 22, and there's going to be 4 or 5 taken of now the 22, of which you're part of. So you put on all of this weight. You're making incredible progress. You make it through the mat drill. You're in the spring game. You make the team. You're one of the 5.
So at that point, they had meetings a couple weeks later after a few more rounds of workouts, and then they just said that they had decided to move forward with other guys. So I did not make the team.
How did you feel at that point?
I was pretty dejected, but not overly so. I mean, I was disappointed because I wanted to make the team then, but I knew that I was only a freshman and that they had already redshirted everyone the fall of that year, so I knew I would have 5 years to play for. So I still had several more seasons left after that point, so I wasn't too down about it or anything.
What was the feedback they get? I mean, they said that they're moving on with other people, but was there a like, hey, like we got our eye on you. It's incredible what you've done, and come back again. What did they say to you?
So it was really it was really just that they had they kind of made decisions, and that they did mention that they actually it split it up in the room. Like they said, you guys, and pointed out several guys that made a lot of progress. Some other guys had not. But really just said it kind of came down to numbers, but no, did not encourage anybody to try out again.
Okay, so this wasn't necessarily singled out. You're bringing the coach's office. They're bringing all of you guys who aren't going to make it into a room and saying.
Yeah, they brought everyone that didn't make it into the same room, and then I think the guys that did make it all had like individual meetings with their position coaches to set goals, things like that.
Okay, but you were singled out in that meeting of, hey, you made really good progress.
Yeah, I was one of the probably 60% of the group that they mentioned, like you guys have, done well and we've seen you progress. And then there were a handful of guys that they said, like, you guys haven't shown us anything or gotten any better during the
All right,
process.
so that's some good feedback. Uh, but they're not encouraging. They're not saying, "Hey, Candler, here's what you should do over the summer. Here's what you can, if you can get to this in the fall, like we want to see you back here." There's
No.
not any of that feedback. Okay, but in your head, you're saying, "All right, I've got 4 more years to do this."
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, that's really interesting. I mean, so the other guys who didn't make it, what was their feeling after that meeting?
Well, there were some that seemed like, well, gave it my best. I'll enjoy the rest of my college experience. And then there were a couple guys that said that they wanted to keep working out and that they were going to try out again. And some of those guys did end up doing it. Some of those guys did not. But there were a couple guys from that first group that that I worked out with some over the summer, and then later, basically at the during that next fall, I knew that they weren't going to do that strength training program where we were working out like alongside the team, because they only do that one time for each person. So I knew that I was going to have to work out on my own. So I found a couple of the guys that said that they wanted to try out, and started working out with them.
These are some of the guys that are in your cohort for the previous year that you guys just
Mm-hmm.
decided to do it together. So that's really interesting.
Yeah.
So you guys, there's a limited spot for you guys, but you guys banded together and said, let's have some strength in numbers and let's hold each other accountable.
Yeah, it wasn't many. It was only 3, including me, because most of the guys just didn't really want to go out again. But yeah, at the end of the day, when you're training, it's always best to have an accountability partner, someone who is working hard with you. You can see, yourself progressing. You can see them progressing, which may make you work even harder. So it's all a good thing. So so when I got to school sophomore year, my weight was up to 200.
Wow.
And I knew I needed to gain a lot more to really be competitive as a linebacker. So I set a goal fall of my sophomore year that I was going to gain 2 pounds a week for the semester. And there were 16 weeks in it. So I would need to hit 232 by the end of that semester in order to achieve my goal.
And that's a lot. So going back though to the summer, were you, it seems like you're probably pretty disciplined over the summer of continuing on the workouts and putting on the weight.
Yeah. I stayed in Athens that summer, continued to work out on my own, continued to eat, and put on, roughly 15 pounds over the summer.
So going back to the next fall, so you have a goal to be 232 by the end of the semester. You're pretty laser focused at this time, even though the odds are stacked against you. Are you also a normal college kid? Are you doing normal college kid stuff?
Somewhat. I didn't have as much free time as a lot of other kids, even outside of tryouts, because at this point, my body had stopped gaining weight from eating 6 meals a day. So over the summer, I went to 7, and then I plateaued. So that fall, I got to 8 full-time meals a day.
Sounds like a full-time job in and of itself.
It was. Between that, working out and doing football training and conditioning work, there wasn't a lot of time. But I did hang out with friends some. I was in a fraternity. I couldn't really go to a lot of the events and stuff, but would go to some of the things when I could. So I still enjoyed a college experience, but it was just usually it'd be on a limited timetable where I may have a handful of hours a week to spend with friends as opposed to a few hours a day.
Yeah. And are you going to Georgia football games that fall?
Mm-hmm. I did. And it was kind of,
you're a fan.
Yeah. It was tough because I was so excited to see the games, but it was also bittersweet because they were the guys that I had been through all the off-season training with.
Yeah.
And then to watch them be out there while I still really wanted to was kind of tough. But it was an exciting season, and it was good to be out there watching those games.
Okay, so you're going through the fall. Where do you end up the end of first semester of your second year?
Sure. So I worked hard and exactly hit my goal to the pound. So ended up at 232.
Wow.
And so
how about your weight? The weight that you're lifting, how did that progress year over year?
That really increased rapidly. So like for instance, when I started college, I could only squat 190. by this point, when I was 232, I could probably already squat like, I don't know, 425 or so.
Wow.
And the numbers were changing by the week because my weight was changing by the week. Or bench press, I went from about 165 to probably 315 at this point. I
You're
had
looking
started,
like a football player at this point.
yeah, at 232. I mean, I was the size of like the scholarship guys
Yeah.
for Georgia at
Wow.
linebacker. But even though my speed had increased significantly, that still wasn't really there at that level. So I
Yeah.
dropped from a 5'6" down to about a 5'2", but even
Wow.
that is still really slow for a linebacker. And there's still a gap, and there always was and always would be, of athleticism. Like a lot of times those guys, when they're diagnosing a play, they can just react so much quicker because their first and second steps are faster than mine.
Yeah, totally.
Where that, there was always going to be a bit of a gap in just like true football talent.
So along this journey, you have these short-term achievable goals, but you have the main goal of making the team. You're not on the team yet, even though you've already you've already beaten back so many of the odds. I mean, the fact that you are, again, part of the spring game, the fact that you're now 232, being able to squat what you're squatting at this point. What was your philosophy on celebrating these short-term wins?
Yeah, I would say that to get excited about it. I mean, you should enjoy your success, enjoy it responsibly, though. Like I basically just used it to fuel even more motivation, because when you see that much progress, it's just really exciting. You look at it and you say, I'm doing all the things I need to do to make this dream happen. And so what I need to do is just stay focused and make sure that I'm not getting thrown off guard by anything going on.
Yeah, I mean, because going from 145 to 232, but like a strong, like fit 232,
Mm-hmm.
not a lot of people can do that. I mean, that's pretty incredible when you think about it.
Yeah, I mean, it was a lot of work. Eating all those meals was just such a grueling process. I mean, nobody wants to spend that much time doing it, and part of what I saw that made such a big difference is that a lot of people in life are willing to put in the work once you get to the exciting phase of things. So, for instance, if you're in a football game and you make a big tackle, everyone's going to cheer really loudly. If you're in the weight room and you make a really big lift, well, then your buddies are going to be happy for you. But if you are doing the right things and you're going to the dining hall on your own when nobody else is, and you're eating right, nobody cares. I mean, at all. So you have to truly be self-driven, because the most important parts of it are the things that come from you that nobody else can really help you with.
I totally agree. I mean, it's one of those things where you can't necessarily you may or may not make the team, right? There's one of those things, like all you can control is what you put into the process, but you can't control whether or not they're going to decide that you make it or not, because you're going to be borderline no matter what. But you can't control what you do on a day in and day out basis, and you can control the progress that you're making. And that's why I think it's really important to celebrate those short-term wins, because again, you can't necessarily control if you're going to make the team or not, but you can control these other things, and you need to reward yourself for that, because no one's making you do it.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. So you need to reward yourself. You need to be excited. Some of my friends and I, when we were trying to reward ourselves, we would do things like, there was a weightlifting tournament called Strongest Dog. Like we all trained for that together that fall and competed in it. And that was kind of a fun way to celebrate some of our like accomplishments in the weight room and eating and stuff like that. So there are a lot of little things like that you can do to celebrate and make sure that you're staying motivated.
And you're enjoying the process.
Yeah, exactly. You really have to. And I will say, when I was in high school, I used to hate weightlifting because I was always the weakest person on the team. And that really changed when I was in college. I just, basically made myself enjoy it, because if you're going to do something, spend that many hours doing it, if you're going to stay motivated, you're going to have to really, learn to enjoy it.
Yeah, no doubt, no doubt. So so then finish your first semester of your second year, are you invited back to the spring training?
Yes, so I spoke with the coach in December, and same guy, Coach Tereshinski, and he just mentioned, yes, you're welcome to try out.
So do you play in the spring game then your second year?
Yeah, so go through tryouts again,
You do
exact
the whole
same
map drill,
process.
everything. Okay, yeah.
hmm Um, go through the spring game. That year, I got to play a few more plays, and I was thinking I really had like a decent chance at it that time. And so then at that point, they actually did it a little differently the next year. What they did spring of my sophomore year was they had already made those cut decisions by the time that guys had their one-on-one meetings with their position coaches. So instead of telling everyone in the group, they told everyone individually. So for me, they basically just said, the team's full. We don't have any more room. Um, and so that was really just kind of it. And then after that, I was on the way back to the locker room because every time you get cut, you have to clear out all your stuff. And I saw there was like a comment sheet that a coach had left, and it was pretty brutally honest on there. I mean, they had said that I was too small, too slow, average strength. And then it ended by saying that like they appreciated my effort and desire, but that I should give it up and was a D3
Ah,
football player at best. And so that was
wow.
kind of the last thing that I had was that comment sheet.
Wow. So, I mean, at that point, are you saying, okay, look, I made a lot of progress. I gave it a shot, and now it's time to hang it up?
Yeah, well, I never thought that, but I was really dejected because I mean, in a lot of ways, I looked like like one of those guys, like a football player at that point. Even the strength coaches, like the head strength coach, had even told me that he thought that I was, really right there on the line where I may make it, I may not. So it seemed like everything was moving towards me being close, but then you see that comment sheet, and it was basically like just never come back again.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I was disappointed. I was frustrated. I went and tried to just like walk it off while like blaring some music on my iPod, and but I still was as committed as ever because I just knew that if I had made all of this progress in 2 years, and I would still have so I knew I was not going to be on the team fall of my junior year or third year, but I knew I still had 2 more seasons that I could play. So I knew like time was kind of running out, but there's still time to make this happen, and I just needed to keep progressing beyond where I was because it just hadn't been enough yet.
So you're committed as ever because you're seeing the progress. I'm curious, is it in the back of your mind that, like, what are the odds in the back of your mind? Like, do you think this is going to happen? If you're assigning probabilities, where are you at this point?
At this point, I probably thought that there was a 50% or greater chance of it happening. That had drastically increased from my freshman year because even if they're saying that maybe I wasn't close to making it that time around, it was really undeniable that I made so much progress that I knew I could keep doing the same things that had gotten me to this point and continue to progress and get there. Because at this point, I'd put on 80 pounds, gotten a lot faster, learned the playbook, which a lot of guys that are trying out, it's their first time doing it. And so they don't know any of the plays, but I had them memorized by this point. So yeah, I thought there was a really good chance. Just keep, doing all the right things, make sure that I don't get dejected or anything. Um, but I also stepped back and decided to reevaluate some things. At this point, I decided that it was probably best for me to change positions because I'd been cut twice as a linebacker. and I really just didn't have like the agility and the quick burst to make it happen, even despite all the speed training. But I knew that I'd been able to put on a lot of weight quickly and have it be good weight. And so I decided that it'd be in my best interest to get as close to the line of scrimmage as possible.
Wow, interesting.
Just because they're, even though you have to be fast to play any position, like even the 300-pound offensive linemen are like strikingly fast if you ever see them do a 40-yard dash compared to your average person. But in general, the closer you are to the ball, the slower you can be. So I thought that may help mask some of my deficiencies. And also, there were just fewer guys trying out as defensive ends. Like it's just kind of a fact that there are a lot more guys that are 210 or 220 trying out as a linebacker than there are that are 250 or 260 playing DN. Those guys just aren't as common once you start getting way above like 220.
So just curious, again, at a very young age, you're very strategic in your thinking. And I'm just curious, like, where is this? Are you talking to your parents? Are you strategizing with your parents? Are you like, like, how do you have this innate understanding?
I mean, I was just keeping my parents updated on what was going on, but I was the only person strategizing, the only person setting all the planning. I had no coach or anything, really just whoever I picked to be my workout partners, those guys hold me accountable. But it was really just me kind of taking an analytical approach to it and just seeing what would increase my odds of making the team. So I decided to change positions to defensive end, even though I'd never played it before. I taught myself how to play by watching YouTube videos, and then decided at that point I had really stopped gaining weight, so I needed to ramp that up again. And so I actually upped it to 10 full-size meals a day, and really did a few other things that were different with my conditioning, just to try to continue to get fast. The fastest I ever got was a 5:0 40, which is still not fast, but it's not crazy slow if you're playing D line.
But also going from a 5.6 to a 5.0, that's a big difference.
Yeah, it really was. It took a ton of work to get to do that, and a ton of just practicing on that specific drill to get better at it. And so continued to train really hard that summer. I was introduced to a guy through one of my friends that actually made the team, and he was a power lifter. So I trained with him all summer, and he took me to some really good gyms where continued to make a lot of progress. And that fall got back on the trying to gain 2 pounds a week plan.
Wow.
And really, once I started getting around probably 245, my weight leveled off again. But I knew that I needed to be bigger than that if I was going to play defensive end. And then also right around this time, late-ish in the semester, Georgia fired all of their defensive coaches except one. And the new coach said he was going to bring in a 3-4 defense, which requires defensive linemen to be even bigger than a 4-3. So I knew I needed to gain a ton of weight. So I couldn't really hold down any more physical food. I felt sick 24/7. I was never hungry. I was eating 10 meals a day. So at that point, I decided I was going to add more liquid calories. So one of UGA's dining halls has a great smoothie bar where you can even ask them to make custom ones for you, but they have some that are just grab and go. And one of them was just peanut butter and banana. And that's just kind of like a go-to, like weight gaining smoothie. Yeah. So I would drink a bunch of those, like probably 8 to 10 of those a day. And then I would add in a lot of whole milk. I read how a lot of bodybuilders would use that in the off season where they're trying to put on as much muscle as possible. And then later they'll like trim off a little of the bad weight, but it was kind of surprising how much of it would be good weight when they were working out and drinking that. So in addition to the 10 meals a day, I would have about like 8 to 10 smoothies and then drink 2 gallons of whole milk every day.
Yeah, this is really interesting. Just it's fascinating listening to this conversation and thinking about the first episode I released with Brendan Russo, where it's like the approach is very similar, but you guys are going the opposite direction. Where he was 300 pounds going down to 175, and here you are trying to do the opposite, but in a good way and in a healthy way. But the philosophy is the same. Again, these short-term achievable goals, the constantly trying to get better, the constantly being better than where you were yesterday. But one thing that I think is really interesting, have you ever looked into Tony Robbins at all, or looked into any of his philosophies or approaches?
Yeah, I have. I'm not like an expert on him, but
Yeah.
I've read a good amount of it, and I really like a lot of what I've seen.
Were you doing it at this time, or is this after college that you fell into
No,
this?
this was after college. During
Yeah.
college, I mostly read articles on this website called Animal Pack. It's like a supplement company. They sell like protein powders, vitamins, all kinds of stuff. Well, they have a section where a lot of like world-renowned bodybuilders and powerlifters will just write articles about their training, about their mindset, about the grueling process of eating. And I'd never really met or heard of a football player going on the kind of diet that I had, just because, I mean, nobody needs to gain 120 pounds, and most guys just wouldn't play football if that was the case.
Yeah.
And so because of that, I was really focusing hard on what bodybuilders and powerlifters were doing and how they were getting through these meal plans. And there were some things that were like health tips that I got from there. Like I didn't want to add a lot of sugar. And so to make my oatmeal less bland, because I was eating it one meal a day, I would usually have like 2 breakfasts, and that would be one of the 2 breakfasts. But to make it less bland, where it was actually like fun, I would put a Splenda in it, because those are actually more healthy. So there were a lot of like health tips that I got. The idea of adding liquid calories once you just could not eat anymore. And so in total, I was taking in a little over 15,000 calories a day at this time.
Wow.
To continue to gain weight.
That's amazing. I brought up Tony Robbins because he has his success formula. It's basically 5 steps. It's know what you're going to focus on. Where your focus goes, your energy flows. It's know your why. Number 3 is take massive action. Number 4 is listen to the feedback. And number 5 is change your approach. And when I think about that success formula and I look at you, it's interesting because you had unbelievable focus, make the University of Georgia football team. You had a massive why. Like there was no negotiating. Like this was your goal. This is what you're going to do. You took a massive action, right? I mean, this is something eating 10 full meals a day, you were massively committed to taking action on a day-to-day basis. But then you listened to the feedback, right? I mean, you heard what the coaches said, you took in the feedback, and then you changed your approach. And you said, okay, you know what? I'm not going to do this at linebacker. I need to change my approach, and I need to put on more weight because I need to be closer to the line. It's just amazing just looking at that success formula and just applying your progress up to this point. And this is exactly what you did.
Yeah, that's funny. I need to read up on that specific process. I've really, in general, listened to a lot of YouTube videos of his, but I don't think I've read that specific process. But that sounds very similar to what I did and kind of the roadmap I lay out at the end of each chapter in the book.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I think it's so funny because just instinctively it's funny because I feel like I talk to people who, again, go through that same process, but then when I talk to them, it's, oh, my parents were big Tony Robbins fans and I listened to like the tapes in the car. And that's what I was trying to get at with you, where it's just like you didn't have that. There was just something innate instinctively inside of you that had that amazing self-awareness and had that drive. But when I think about that formula that he lays out, it's called a success formula, and it's exactly what you did.
Yeah, that is interesting. Just the overlap there. It sounds like, very, very similar process, but that is, that's exactly what I did. And it served me well during that process.
Yeah. So here you are, you're now your junior year, you finished, you're trying to put on another 32 pounds. So where do you end the first semester of your junior year?
Right. So I end that semester being 250. And I had actually during the spring before then, I had lost a little weight, which was kind of on purpose because during mat drills, I knew that if I went through that at 232, like it just wouldn't be good. So I'd probably lost like 10 pounds or so that last semester when I was trying out, because when you're trying to gain that much weight, or even if you're looking at the opposite, you're trying to lose a bunch of weight, you have to know there are going to be ebbs and flows to it. There are going to be plateaus. there were always like quick burst periods where in a couple months I could put on 30 pounds. But then after that, whether they were mat drills or not, I probably couldn't have gained any more weight for another several months.
Yeah.
Your body just has to recuperate and get used to like moving around and being and having your speed develop while you're that new size.
Yeah.
And then after, at a certain point, you could start to add more meals, change up to maybe a different workout, and then start gaining again. So I was around 250. I went into coach's office. I thought he was going to say, don't try out again after the comment sheet from the year before. And Coach Tereshinsky just looked at me like he wasn't surprised at all. He was like, well, yeah, of course you can try out.
Okay.
So for the spring of my junior year, they have us go through the same process again. So I was going through another physical. And when I was doing it this time, the nurse kind of like glanced down at my chart and then said she'd be back in a second. And then she came around the corner and said that I had randomly been selected for steroid testing because she had like a chart of my weight over the last few years. Not a single other person out of like the 40 players in that room was randomly selected. But
That's hilarious.
They had me do that, and then obviously I had nothing to worry about because I knew the reason for my progress. And so then that year I tried out as a defensive end, and Rodney Garner was the defensive line coach, and he was always held in such high esteem that he was the only defensive coach to not be fired the previous year. So they knew that, he's great. We want him to stay there. So part of what I worried about was that he would remember that I had tried out twice, didn't make it either time, but his job wasn't really to worry about the linebackers at all. So I don't think he even remembered that I had tried out before.
Yeah. Okay.
So it was I was surrounded by brand new, mostly defensive coaches other than the one. It was a new defensive scheme. So everyone was kind of at ground zero learning it. So there were a lot of advantages to some of the changes that happened in that season.
So none of these coaches know that you were 145 pounds just a couple years earlier.
Maybe some of the offensive coaches remembered it, but nobody on defense because they were all new. And then the one other coach, I had changed position groups, so it wasn't even his group to keep track of. But there were other guys, like the strength coach obviously knew. He'd been there the whole time. So there were some guys that had seen that.
But is anyone coming to you and saying like, this is the most remarkable change that we've ever seen? I mean, is there, because I just have to imagine if I'm a coach and I'm seeing this, like I want you a part of my team, in part just because you have something that I want to rub off on the other guys. Like, is anyone talking about anything along those lines?
There were a couple of like the head strength coach and a couple of the assistants that had mentioned things like that. My position coach didn't, but it's only because he didn't remember me from the first couple of tryouts, which I was kind of fine with in a way. You make a great point that it's possible the coaches would have seen it that way and really wanted me on the team. But part of me was thinking, if I don't have to bring up that I was cut twice before, I'd rather not. So later, as Coach Garner, the defensive line coach, got to know me, he definitely heard about like the rest of the story, and he wrote the foreword to my book. And so he talked with other coaches and was like, wait, that was the same guy. But at the time, he just saw me and the other guys as like, hey, this is a new group of defensive ends that want to try out.
Okay. So you go through the mat drill, you go through a spring game, you go through everything like the previous 2 years. And so what happens at the end of this spring season?
Yeah, so at this point, I was like a seasoned vet with the whole spring football process, even though I never made the team to this point. But yeah, so I get there and they have one-on-one meetings again to let everyone know the decision. And Coach Garner was just so matter of fact, like from the very first day that I stepped out there, that he expected me to make the team. It was kind of interesting because, like I write in my book, I don't know what I expected if I thought like streamers would shoot down from the ceiling when I made the team or whatever. But it was just so matter of fact. Like Coach Garner always expected it. He said, you're doing this couple things good. Here are a couple things that we need you to improve on.
This isn't the spring training. He's saying like you're doing all the right things. So you're feeling good.
Yes, this was at the end. This was after the spring game and everything. This is like when they're making their cuts. And so he just said, we have room for you on the team. Here are a couple of things we want you to work on over the summer. And, we'll see you in the fall.
So you made it.
Yeah, so I made it.
Okay, but like again, it was matter of fact. So the skies didn't open up. It wasn't like a big celebration. There wasn't a big banner. It was just
No,
like you're on.
there wasn't, but I was so excited. I went back into the locker room after that, and for the first time, I did not have to clear out my locker, and it felt different because for the first time, it was like my locker room. I wasn't like a visitor in some other team's locker room.
Were you emotional in this moment?
Yeah, I mean, I was just so excited, just like jumping for joy. I was excited also after the meeting to just see, the other guys trying out, which ones of them had hopefully made the team too. But yes, I was very excited because I had been through all of this practice, but like at this point in my life, it had been like 4 years since I had even stood on the sideline for a real football game, like since my senior year in high school. So I had been in like a perpetual off season for the last 4 years, and I was ready for the season to get there.
Wow. So you're told you make the team, you're told to come back in the fall, and then what?
So I work out hard on my own over the summer, put on a little more weight. I got to 265. And then from that point on, I just maintained. There wasn't really any way for me to ingest more calories. And also, I did not want my speed to drop off to the point of being a liability. So I knew I was at like a good size for a walk-on defensive end. So really just kind of completed the weight gain process, then got back in the fall.
But hold on real fast though. But like, people must be amazed who are around you, like your close friends and family, like they must be ecstatic for what you just accomplished. I mean, this was the goal and you just hit it.
Yeah, they were all very, very excited. I was really excited to tell my family and tell my friends about it. For the last, I guess, like 3 years running, my mom had been struggling to like buy pant sizes that fit me as I continued to grow so much. So she was glad when I said, I'm finished gaining weight. I'm just going to maintain it. I'm at a good spot right now. But yeah, they were all very, very excited for me. And then, headed back to Athens for the fall of my 4th year, which was my redshirt junior season.
Right. Okay. So you have 2 years of eligibility.
Yes. It was super excited. And then I find out, for the first game we were playing Louisiana Lafayette, and not a lot of people know this. I assume this is the same for all Power 5 conferences, but I know this is the SEC rules at least. You can only dress out 85 guys for conference games, and you can only dress out 65 guys for away conference games. But for non-conference, there's no limit. You could dress out everyone if you wanted to. So there are 85 guys on scholarship. So if you're ever going to dress for an SEC game, you have to take somebody's place as a walk-on. So it's very difficult to do that.
Okay.
But I also knew that usually 1 or 2 games a year against like the so-called cupcake teams, the coach tries to dress out a lot more people. Like they're out of the 125 guys, he may dress out 105 or 110, or sometimes maybe even the whole 125. So anyway, I found out for the first game of the 2010 season against Louisiana Lafayette that I would be dressing out. So that was when I was super excited.
Wow.
I definitely, called my parents then. I was kind of like holding back happy tears because there was just so much work had gone into seeing that. And to finally be on the cusp of dressing out for a game, I was just on cloud 9.
Oh my God. No doubt. No doubt. What was it like going through fall camp? Because this is your first time now in fall camp.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was exciting because in the spring and really early fall, you're installing the playbook, which that's always fun to learn the plays. But about midway through fall camp, you start switching to game planning for actual opponents. Mm-hmm. And there were some different things that we did. Like you spent a lot of time on your week 1 opponent. We spent some time in the off season practicing specifically for Georgia Tech because at the time they ran a triple option offense, and it's just so funky when you're facing it from a defensive perspective that we didn't want to have only 1 week right before that game to rehearse. So we had several practices that were just Georgia Tech days.
That's like the last game of the season too, right?
It is, yes.
Wow, okay.
So it was really fun to switch from just installing the playbook to now we're gonna start putting together a game plan for some of these teams, and we would have scrimmages in the actual stadium, so it was kind of building up to a game atmosphere. So that part was really exciting. I definitely enjoyed fall camp.
So go back to the first game. So you're dressing for this very first game, Louisiana Lafayette, and so tell me about it. What was that experience? What was game day like?
It was amazing. It was, sellout crowd. Everyone, like the fans were so loud that when we were getting ready to run onto the field, the noise in the tunnel was just deafening.
What was it like running out of the tunnel?
It was just such an exciting experience. It was almost surreal because it feels like the ground's almost shaking because there's like it now they run out of a different end zone, but at the time you're running out of this concrete tunnel, so the noise just like builds and has nowhere to go, other than just like staying trapped in there. And then everyone's like you're running onto the field at the same time. So there's just the excitement. You can hear like the band playing. You see like the guys running out, holding out like the UGA flag. So just such an exciting way to start the season with being able to be on the sideline for that. And it was a great game too. I mean, the team really took care of business. They did what they should have done. And
did you play?
We only gave up 7 points on the day, but our defensive coordinator was furious that we didn't get a shutout. So it was all in all, it was, just an awesome experience to finally be out there and experience a game. But I also knew that like my end goal wasn't just to be on the team. I wanted to play in a game. So there was still that feeling of, this is absolutely amazing, but there's still one more thing left.
So you didn't play in that game?
No, I didn't. And I didn't expect to, even when we got up really big, with it being my first game dressing out, I just didn't think I would get the chance to. And what a lot of people may not think about, even in some of these cupcake games, is that there's so many guys to rotate through because the team is so deep. On a lot of college teams, they're really like 6 strings of players since there are 125 guys. And so once you get like a pretty big lead, you'll put in the full second string. There are usually some second string guys that are almost kind of first string as well, so maybe they get reps earlier, but you'll probably put in the full second string. Then once the lead gets to maybe 35 or 42, you put in the third string guys. Then you put in some freshman scholarship guys that need some reps. Then you get around to the walk-ons, and usually by the time that happens, it's very late in the game, and they're thinking through like, hey, who are the seniors like that I can get in the game? So I don't think it was ever really going to happen that day. So, but I wasn't worried about it. It was so fun to be out there on the sideline, but I knew that for future games there was still something else I needed to achieve.
So going on that season, then you're dressing for some of the games, not dressing for some of the games. You're traveling. Are you traveling with the team?
No, so for games out of town, they can only take 65 guys. So for that, there are no walk-ons. So actually, the opening game was the only game that I dressed out for during the regular season. And it's because that year we only played 2 quote-unquote cupcake teams. And so coach actually split it up. And for the guys who did not dress for the season opener, he dressed them out later against the second cupcake team so that everybody would get at least one. And then, it was a brutal season. Georgia, since 96 through today, has won a minimum of 8 games every year, except for my first year on the team. So it was like kind of like a notoriously bad team. And it's not like the talent wasn't there. It was just all like falling apart in the fourth quarter. Like it was just kind of a lack of poise. Like we had one game where we fumbled the ball at the 1 yard line. Another game where we were actually down 14 with only, I think, 8 minutes to go. And we managed to tie the game up with 30 seconds left. Well, in 30 seconds, we managed to give up a touchdown to lose.
I feel like that was 2011?
2010.
2010. Okay. Yeah.
And there was another game we were down by 2 late in the fourth quarter. We're in field goal range. We're running the clock out. While we're running the clock out, we fumble the ball. Then later in the season, we battled back from down 14, but then lost in overtime against Florida. So a lot of like close, gut-wrenching losses where the team wasn't really getting blown out much. Like even Auburn, who was undefeated and won the national championship with Cam Newton. We had a lead on them in the third quarter. I mean, our team was competitive, but could not finish against a lot of great teams. And so we did qualify for a bowl game. We went to the Liberty Bowl that year, and I got to dress out for that. So that was the second game I'd ever dressed out for.
Oh, no way.
So that was a cool experience going out of town. They had several events that the team could do. Like they took us to a rodeo, and I'd never been to one before. So that was fun. We went to a Memphis Grizzlies basketball game, and they had AJ Green do like a shoot off during halftime against one of the players from UCF that we were playing against. And then another day they took us to like the Memphis Redbirds, which is part of the minor league association for the Cardinals. They took us to their batting cages, and they let us take some batting practice.
So there was a lot celebrity of fun stuff. Treatment.
I guess so. And then unfortunately at the game, our offense was just like extinct. I mean, we didn't move the ball at all. We ended up losing 10-6.
Oh, really?
So yeah, and not that UCF was bad. They won 11 games that year. They were, ranked. They were a good team. But for us to finish 6-7 was just kind of like a disaster of a season in terms of expectations.
So then going back do you with the full intention then you're making the team the next season?
Yeah. So the next season I didn't have to try out again. Once you make you make it.
Oh, okay.
And unless something happens where you get like kicked off the team, once you make it, you're on. So that next off season, there was no pressure of like, I need to try out and make it. It was really just, I need to improve myself from like a football skills standpoint to where like my technique would get a little better and coach would feel fine about putting me into a game. So
physically you're good at this point.
Yeah. And so I go through all the off-season practices again. By this time I've memorized it like the back of my hand. And then, so basically, go into summer of 2011, knowing that I'm going to go back for fall of my 5th year. And this is like one last season to make everything happen.
Yeah. So tell me about the first game. Did you dress for the first game?
Yeah. So that year, not only did I come back for fall practice, but for fall camp, they can only take 105 guys. And they actually automatically include all of the preferred walk-ons. So among the walk-ons that try out, there may be room for 4 or 5 of them to go to camp. So I had not gone to like camp at the start of the previous year, but I did make it this year. So I was excited.
Oh, okay. So you're seeing progress again.
Yeah, and one night or several nights actually, they had something called the hot seat where guys could stand up, and usually it's seniors or captains that are, telling their story and what Georgia football means to them. So one night I stood up and, basically told the guys, what I'm telling you and what I ended up writing about just for my story and how much it meant to me to be a part of this team.
Wow, that's amazing. How long did you speak for?
Probably 15 to 20 minutes.
Wow. Did people come up to you afterwards and talk about how it meant, what it meant to them?
Yeah, I had one of the graduate assistant coaches who later went on to be one of my coworkers a few years into the future. He actually said that was one of the most inspirational stories he'd ever told. Wow. One of the guys that came up, a starter actually, and just came up and spoke with me afterwards and was like, I've never heard of anyone who's done that or gone through that.
Amazing.
And so to answer your question, going into the season, this year was a much different start to the season. Instead of starting with Louisiana Lafayette, we were starting with Boise State, who was ranked number 5. So they were ranked ahead of us.
I remember that game.
So they were, projected to be a very good team yet again, favored over us. So I was, really excited. I got to dress out for that game. And that was in Atlanta, which is where I'm from. So that was a big deal to get to dress out for that one.
It was in the Georgia Dome, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
So really, really exciting game. It was kind of a crazy weekend because that kickoff game in Atlanta is always the same weekend as Dragon Con. And so at one point on the day of the game, they bused us from Athens to Atlanta. And so I was going in an elevator with some of my other teammates to head down to the team meeting, and 8 people with just the funkiest costumes you've ever seen get on the elevator with us and just like stare at us like, well, those are lame costumes. What are y'all supposed to
be? That's awesome.
So we get to the stadium, the game starts. Nike had given both teams like special uniforms that we each only wore for that one game. Georgia was wearing these like gray helmets that we've never worn before. Anyway, the game didn't end up going as well as we'd liked. We had a lot of guys in the secondary that were out with injuries, and it showed. That quarterback, like we really held them in check the first like quarter and a half, but especially in the third quarter, they were just starting to burn us in the secondary. He knew what we were doing, because with the backups that we had in the game, we weren't even calling our most complicated coverages. We were just keeping everything pretty basic. And so quarterback like the one they had was really, picking us apart. So Boise State ends up winning that game by 14. So that was tough. There was a lot of talk in the offseason about should Georgia fire their coach, after a 6-7 season. And the years before that weren't particularly great. Like in 2009, we went 8-5, which that's kind of the minimum threshold at Georgia. And then the year before that, we were pretty good. We went 10-3, but that was the year we started off preseason number 1 and ended up number 10. So by that standard, it wasn't as good. So, I mean, just thinking about it, in the 4 years I'd been in college, we'd gone from 11 wins down to 10, down to 8, down to 6. So this was really like a make or break season as a program. So to start off with that loss was really tough. And then the next week we're playing South Carolina, and this was really in like the peak of their 3 seasons under Spurrier, where they did really, really well. And so I did not make the dress list for that game, but then the day before the game, I got a call from the director of football operations saying that somebody had decided they just didn't feel like dressing out on Saturday, and I was the next person. I have no idea why somebody, better plans or what, why they just choose not to dress out for their own team's game. But I was the next one on the list, so I did end up getting to dress out for that game. So I was excited. South Carolina was a top 10 team, so we've got back-to-back top 10 matchups to start the season, and that game just had everything in it. It started off slow, like it would be a defensive matchup. We got a few field goals, and then out of nowhere, it just picked up like crazy. Like we turned the ball over several times. South Carolina like faked a punt and ran it like 80 yards for a touchdown. Then at one point we pulled off just an amazing onside kick, and we got called for offsides. And you go back and look at the replay, and the coaches actually said in film that the guys didn't do a good enough job of crowding the ball. They were actually too far back, and nobody was offsides. But offsides isn't a reviewable officiating call, so they didn't take a look at that. So we had a couple tough breaks go our way, and at the end of the game, we were trying to rally. We were down by 3, and they had a guy break right through the line of scrimmage, and we fumbled it, and they ran it in for a touchdown. So even though we did score again, we still lost by 3 in that game. So just super tough starting the season with back-to-back losses after how tough of an offseason and previous season it was. And then basically everyone in 2011, or the media and a lot of the kids on campus, the whole thought was the season is the first 2 games. That's it. Those are the 2 highest ranked teams y'all play in the regular season, and we lost both of them. And so progressing from there, the team really bonded together, did not get dejected, and went on just a great winning streak, where we actually won 10 games in a row, which to this day, since 1982, that's the longest winning streak within one season that Georgia has had.
Wow.
So it was kind of crazy to see the team come together like that. And there were some games that come to mind, like against Florida, our biggest rival, who we had really been struggling against for the last probably 15 to 20 years leading up to this game for the most part. We got down by 14 pretty early, and it wasn't really looking good. But then our defense forced a fumble, and our offense couldn't really move the ball that well, but they decided to go for it on 4th and 5 and threw a touchdown pass. Then to start the third quarter, we forced another fumble, and the offense stalled again. Well, they went for it on 4th and 5 again and threw another touchdown pass. So just some gutsy play calling got us back in that game. We end up winning that one by 4. And then after that, we were getting ready to face New Mexico State, and this was the last Cupcake game of the season. So I know if I am ever going to play in a Georgia uniform, it's this game. So I was super excited all week. On that Thursday, I decided to go into my position coach's office and just say, hey, if we get a big lead, I really want to play in this game. And he just said, we hadn't had a lot of big leads so far this season, but I'll see what I can do on Saturday. So that Saturday, it started off kind of slow. We were only up 7-3 at the end of the first quarter, so not a big lead. Well, then thankfully the starters just caught on fire, and in the second quarter set a UGA record and scored 42 points in one quarter.
And this is in Georgia. This is in Athens.
Yes. Okay, in Athens.
Okay.
So they just exploded. So thankfully we've got a huge lead we're taking into the half, which is big because in the third quarter we were able to go ahead and get in second and third string guys, a few of those freshman scholarship players. So now it's about midway through the fourth quarter. We're up 63-10. And I'm kind of pacing behind my position coach and like loudly clearing my throat to like let him know like, hey, I'm here. And soon after that, he sends a graduate assistant coach over to tell me like, hey, go ahead and get loosened up and start warming up. So, I mean, at this point, it's late in the fourth quarter, probably been about 3 hours since warm-ups were finished. So I was pretty stiff. So I started like stretching out and jogging some. And then, the next time that we're on defense, he just says, all right, you're in. And I start running onto the field. And I remember thinking like how loud it was, even though at this point in the game, a lot of people had cleared out, which ended up in some ways helping because my family was all able to congregate on like the 50-yard line because so many people had, 63-10 in the fourth quarter, they're heading out. Well, so I get in and really I'm just trying in this moment to just focus on everything that I've practiced, all the plays that I've run for years now. Well, I guess 2 years since that's when the defense changed, but just knowing my responsibility. So I get in there for the first play, and actually there were two other scholarship guys in the game, and one of them said that he was lining up at DN on that play instead of nose guard. And so I wasn't really playing nose guard, but I knew that I was the one new guy going in on that drive. And so if anything was messed up, it was going to be because I messed it up. And so he was basically saying he was just switching positions with me, and I was like, all right, fine. So I lined up at nose guard on the first play and take on like a double team block. They end up running like off tackle to the other side, so I wasn't really that close to it or anything. Well, then the next play, the guy says, all right, I'll switch back. And so then I line up at defensive end, and that time they run a sweep to the opposite side. And then after two plays, the coach yells, and he was going to sub in more walk-ons. So that was it for what I got to go in. So didn't really have a chance to get a tackle, but definitely achieved my goal of getting to play in a game.
It's amazing. It is a truly amazing story. And I mean, number one, you should be really proud of yourself. But I have to imagine, now that you're no longer at school, that the process that you went through to go from a 145-pound kid that barely played in high school to then being a legit college football player at one of the top programs in the country, I have to imagine that process sticks with you today. And can you talk about that a little bit? How you take that into your day-to-day life?
Yeah, so there's a lot of stuff that I take from that's still very important to me. Basically, just always being willing to take an honest evaluation of where I am, and knowing that I'm really in control of things. I'm big on focusing on like the locus of control. Like I try to stress as little as I can about things that I cannot control, and focus all my energy on things that I can control, which applies perfectly to work. There may be some situations where your company is stuck with a client and the client is just like a nightmare, and there's some things you can't control. It may just be your job to manage this really terrible relationship, and you can't really control it. So try as little to stress about things like that as you can, but focus on the things that you can control. Don't blame other people, and just make sure that you keep working hard while still staying patient, because that's something that very few people can do. A lot of people will give you one or the other of those, but I had to be willing to work incredibly hard while staying patient, knowing that success was not right around the corner for years. So from the day that I walked into Coach Tereshinski's office, until I finally got to play was 1,543 days.
Wow.
And I had to make every last one of those count in order to make that happen.
It's amazing. That really is. If somebody has a lofty goal, based on this story, I mean, number one, I feel like someone could listen to this story and apply it to anything they want to accomplish. But if someone were to come to you and say, hey, look, this is a 2-hour interview. I don't have time to read your book, but I want 3 things that, what are the 3 pieces of advice that you have for someone that has that lofty goal? It doesn't have to be 3 to 5 things. What would they be?
Sure. Yeah, if they needed to, I would say basically just put together the advice that I give at the end of each chapter, because that's really the guide map or whatever. But one, I would say don't shy away from setting big goals. A lot of people get scared or just think that it's not meant for them. Somebody else can do that, not me. So I would say don't shy away. That doesn't mean you need to share it with everybody, but make sure that you're always setting big goals for yourself. And then 2 is you have to break it down into small pieces. You need to come up with ways where, like, you have a goal maybe once every month or so. And if you hit it, you'll be super excited. If you don't, you need to seriously look at what went wrong and see if you need to just push a little harder, or if you need to change your perspective on things. Like I needed to change positions in order to make the team. And then for number 3, you have to be willing to outwork everyone. And that could, people talk about hard work. That's a term that's thrown around very loosely, but I feel like a lot of the times in today's society, hard work is kind of like a lost art. Like a lot of people are so focused on what's the easiest and most painless way to just get by. And that's not really going to help yourself a lot in the long term. So you have to be willing to push yourself way out of your comfort zone, take smart risks, continue to build, never be satisfied, and really just continue to raise expectations for yourself.
I love it. I love it. So I want to end with, so what's your goal now?
Sure. Yeah. So now that achieved my goal in football, really my goals are career focused. It's involved around bringing more business to my company, continuing to show more value there, and really follow a lot of the same steps that I did in football. Like focus on what I do that's working, what I do that's not working as well as I'd like. I try to do a lot of like research into whatever field I'm in. So when that's football, I was constantly reading articles, watching videos, things like that. When it comes to business, I read a ton of business books, especially during the pandemic. I've been reading about a book a week.
Love that.
And really can't get enough of that. So I would say just, it's important to me that I never stop learning and trying to sharpen myself. But yeah, basically just taking a lot of the same principles from football and now just focusing in the finance world.
Can I ask one more question actually with respect to the pandemic? How has this time been for you, and how are you using this time to your advantage?
Sure. So I would say it's been very useful. It's obviously unfortunate what's happening to a lot of businesses just out of nowhere, the ultimate curveball that's hurting a lot of people, where people got laid off, or businesses that, used to be very profitable. Now they're just getting by, or they're losing a lot of money. So for me personally, I spent a lot more time reading. I had kind of gotten off track with that before, where I was reading maybe only 2 or 3 books a year the last couple of years. And now it's like 1 a week. And it's kind of funny. The more that I've been reading, the more I've had like free books to read, where things like where Scribe set up, where, you can pick 1 book a month that's coming out. And yours was the one I chose out of, I think, like 20 options that month. So, so things like that. And then my boss actually gave me 2 books to read. And then I had a couple books left over from, I had done meetings before the pandemic where like once a month, this group would have a breakfast where a CEO or former CEO would come speak to everyone, and they'd give everyone a copy of their book. So I probably had 8 books lined up to read.
So what's been the best one so far?
I would say a book called The Anatomy of Peace. It's by the Arbinger Institute. The second favorite would be How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. I know that's a really popular book, but yeah, The Anatomy of Peace was such a great book. It talked about the way that people perceive others and themselves, and how a lot of people, even subconsciously, kind of view themselves as more important than other people. And they use the phrase "in the box" versus "out of the box." And they talk about what a difference it makes in person to person interaction, especially in difficult situations, if you can take yourself out of the box and try to see things from the other person's perspective.
Wow.
And value them, and just know that they have needs, wants, and goals that are just as important as yours. And the difference that that can make, and they refer to it as like having a heart that's at peace with someone, even during tough situations.
That should be mandatory reading, especially in this political environment right now. But that sounds like a book that's right up my alley. So I'll definitely take a look at that one. But from underdog to bulldog, I highly recommend people pick this up. I have to say, it is a really powerful book. I would say that the books that remind me of this are The Can't Hurt Me from David Goggins and the Living with a Seal from Jesse Itzler. Have you read any one of those?
I haven't, but Can't Hurt Me is actually on my list. If I ever hear about a good book, I try to just take a note about it.
Yeah.
And that is second up on my list to read. So probably within the next couple of weeks, I'll be getting in and reading it.
That book and Living with a Seal, those are the two that I can think of that remind me of your book. Both amazing books, two of my favorite books out there. So really appreciate you taking the time for you sharing the story today. If someone wants to connect with you who's listening, how can they do so?
Sure, they can connect with me on LinkedIn. It's Candler Cook, or they can send me an email to candlercook@gmail.com.
Excellent. Candler, really appreciate you sharing your story today. It's super inspiring. I took a lot from this interview, a lot from your book. I just want to thank you for everything you're doing.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. Really appreciate this. I enjoyed listening to that first episode, and I'm looking forward to hearing more of them, and just hearing some more success stories from other people in all kinds of different fields. So I appreciate you having me on.
Absolutely, man. Thanks so much.
All right, episode 9 is in the books. What do you think about Candler? Super inspiring story. I took away so much from this. I have to say, I think about all of the times where I've given up on goals in my life. And I can tell you, after listening to Candler, that will no longer be the case. I think he gave us some really actionable steps here and feedback, just in terms of having intense focus and the importance of having short-term achievable goals. And also changing your approach when what you're doing isn't necessarily working. He thought he was going to be a linebacker, but after being cut a couple of times, realized, you know what, I'm probably not going to make it as a linebacker, but I can still make the team if I change my approach, if I put on more weight, more muscle, and move to defensive end. So it's one of those things where I think about goals that I have going forward, and I'm going to go back and listen to this episode to take out some of the points that Candler shared with us. And if you're really enjoying this interview and you want to learn more about Candler and his story, check out his book, From Underdog to Bulldog, My Journey as a College Football Walk-On. He's a really good writer. I loved this book. It kind of reminded me of David Goggins' Can't Hurt Me, or Jesse Itzler's Living with a Seal. If you don't know those books, pick up those books as well, because they're really good. Anyway, I'm going to leave it here. Thank you so much for sharing your time with me today. I hope you found it useful and productive and inspiring. And I look forward to seeing you next week on episode 10.